Why hyper-independent people make everyone else feel useless. Someone offers to drive you to the appointment. You say you are fine. It takes less than a second, and you do not even hear yourself do it. The offer was real. The person meant it. They had the afternoon free and they wanted to spend it sitting in a waiting room with you, reading something on their phone, occasionally looking up to check your face. They wanted the boredom of it. That was the point, and you handed the offer back so quickly and so pleasantly that they did not get the chance to insist. Then you drove yourself, and you handled it, and you parked in the structure across the street, and paid for parking, and read the same paragraph of a magazine 4 times. On the way home, you felt something you would not name. Not pride exactly. Something flatter than pride, something closer to the feeling of closing a laptop. A task had been completed without incident. That was all, and weeks later that same person stopped offering things. You noticed. You noticed with a precision that should have alarmed you, because a person who does not want help does not usually keep an exact record of when the offers stopped arriving. You told yourself they had gotten busy. People do get busy. The explanation was available, and you took it. Because the other explanation required looking at something you have never wanted to look at. Most people would call this being strong. Some would call it being self-reliant, or being low maintenance, or being the one who never causes problems. Others, less kindly, would call it a fear of vulnerability, as if you were simply too frightened to open a door you could open at any moment. None of those explanations survive contact with what actually happens in the room. You are not afraid of being helped. You are efficient about it. You have run the calculation so many times that the calculation now runs itself, without your participation, before the sentence offering help has finished. And the answer is always the same. And the answer is that it costs less to do it alone. What follows is not about learning to ask for help. That instruction has been given to you before, probably by somebody who cared about you and had run out of other things to say, and it changed nothing because it was addressed to a problem you do not have. This is about what your competence does to the people who love you, what it silently tells them about their own value, and where you learned that receiving anything creates a balance that someone else gets to call in. You will see the mechanism, then the damage, then the one thing being requested of you that you have never once granted. The part that reframes everything is not the childhood. It is what happens to the person standing next to you while you handle it, and that part comes last. Competence as a closed door. Your competence is real. This is worth establishing before anything else because every conversation you have had about this topic has quietly implied that your capability is a costume, that underneath it there is a helpless person waiting to be discovered and released. There is not. You genuinely can do most of it. You have done most of it. The evidence is a life that functions, bills that are paid, appointments that are kept, crises that were absorbed so smoothly that nobody around you registered there had been a crisis. That last part deserves attention. There have been weeks in your life that were structurally unsurvivable, and they were survived. And the people closest to you found out about them afterward in summary form, delivered lightly, with the ending already attached. You do not report from inside a difficulty. You issue statements once the difficulty has been resolved. This is not deceit. It is a reflex about timing, and the reflex has a rule, and the rule is that you may be seen after the fact, but not during. The problem is not that the competence is fake. The problem is what competence does when it is the only door in the building. A person who is good at everything and permeable to nothing has built something that looks like a house and functions like a wall. From the outside, the wall is impressive. People say so. They say you are the most capable person they know, and they say it with a strange flatness, the way someone describes a monument rather than a friend. Consider what a monument offers the people who visit it. Admiration, yes. Proximity, no. You cannot be useful to a monument. You cannot bring a monument soup. You cannot sit up with a monument at 2 a.m. and feel afterward that you were part of something. The monument does not need the night to end. And so the people who love you arrive with something in their hands, find nowhere to put it, and begin the slow process of learning not to bring anything at all. Some part of you is reading this and feeling accused. That reading is understandable and it is wrong. Nothing here is a charge against your character. The wall was not built out of contempt for anyone. It was built out of arithmetic, under conditions where the arithmetic was correct. That process has a starting point, and it is almost never a conflict. The bill that came with help. Somewhere in your history, help arrived with an invoice attached. Not violence, not neglect in the way that word is usually used. Something more precise and much harder to report to anyone. You needed something and it was given, and then the giving was mentioned. It was mentioned at dinner, in front of other people, in a tone that sounded almost like affection. It was mentioned the next time you disagreed with the person who gave it. It was mentioned as evidence months later, in a sentence that began with "everything I have done for you." The help was real. The help was also recorded, and the record was retrievable at any moment. And the retrieval always happened at the exact moment you had least room to argue. Sit with what that arrangement teaches, because a child in it learns faster than any adult could deliberately teach. The child learns that receiving is not free. Every unit of help creates a balance owed, and the balance is held by someone else, and you do not control the timing of the collection. The debt is not merely financial, and it is not merely emotional. It is leverage held indefinitely at the discretion of the lender. There is exactly one way to keep that balance at zero, and it is not to become strong. Strength is a side effect, not a strategy. The strategy is simpler and far more effective. Stop accepting deposits. This is the mechanism, and it differs from the mechanism you have been offered by every article and every well-meaning friend. You were not taught that people are unreliable. If you had been taught that, you would be anxious, and you are not anxious. You are calm to a degree that other people find slightly unnerving. You were taught something more specific. You were taught that people are reliable, and that their reliability is expensive. Help does arrive. It simply arrives with terms. So you did the only rational thing available to somebody who cannot afford the interest rate. You closed the account. You did not close it in anger, and you did not announce the closure. You closed it the way a careful person closes anything, quietly, in a way that could be reversed later, except that later never came and the closure hardened into personality. Which is why the offer of a ride does not register as kindness. It registers as a price you have not yet been told. What your speed does to the people beside you. Speed is the part nobody warns you about. When something breaks, you fix it before the other person finishes assessing that it is broken. When someone is upset, you have already identified the cause and the remedy and begun executing the remedy while they are still describing the feeling. When a plan collapses, the replacement plan is announced within a minute, complete, with contingencies. To you, this feels like care, and it is care. That is the confusing part. You are removing the burden from the room. You are the person who does not make other people carry things. Watch what that speed does across a year. The other person reaches for something and finds it already handled. They reach again and find it handled again. The third time they hesitate before reaching, and the hesitation is not resentment yet, it is calibration. They are learning the timing of the household. By the fourth or fifth month there is a specific expression that appears on a face, and it is not gratitude. It is a small retraction, the look of somebody putting their hands back in their pockets. Hands in pockets is the whole diagnosis, and you have seen it 100 times without decoding it once. You have taught them, with total consistency and no unkindness whatsoever, that their contribution arrives too late to matter. Not that it is unwelcome. Worse, that it is unnecessary. Unwelcome can be argued with. Unwelcome has an author, a preference, something a person can negotiate against. Unnecessary has no author. It is simply the condition of the world, demonstrated daily, and the evidence is right there in the fact that everything is already fine. There is a further cruelty in the timing. Because you are fast, the other person never gets to fail at helping you either. Failure would at least be participation. Failure would produce a conversation, an apology, a second attempt, all of the ordinary machinery by which two people become necessary to each other. They are denied even that. They are held permanently at the stage before the attempt. And what a person does with hands they cannot use is the beginning of a different problem. The difference between strong and unreachable. There is a distinction being collapsed in every conversation you have had about this, and the collapse is what keeps you stuck. Strong means you can bear weight. Unreachable means weight cannot be placed on you. These are not the same property, and the second is not an intensified version of the first. A bridge is strong. A bridge that will not permit anything to be set down on it is not a stronger bridge. It is a bridge that has stopped being a bridge and become a sculpture of one. Admired from the bank, crossed by nobody. You have been told your whole life that you are the first thing. You have quietly suspected you might be the second. That suspicion is the only accurate self-assessment in the entire situation, and you have been dismissing it as false modesty for years, because everyone around you keeps confirming the first reading, and it feels ungrateful to argue with a compliment. Being unreachable is not a character flaw, and calling it selfishness misses it entirely. It is a load-bearing decision made by a much younger version of you under conditions that made it correct. That version deserves credit rather than correction. It answered a genuine emergency using the only material a child had. But the decision has a consequence that strength does not have, and the consequence is asymmetry. In every relationship you have, weight moves in one direction. You carry, they watch you carry. Over time, watching somebody carry things becomes its own kind of labor, and it is labor with no product, and people cannot sustain it indefinitely without concluding something about their position. Test it directly. Name the last time somebody carried something for you that mattered. Not a favor, not a ride to the airport, something where their failure would have cost you materially. If the answer requires searching, the search is the finding. The asymmetry is not a feeling you have. It is a fact about the last several years, and it is the sort of fact that other people notice long before you do. The next thing to understand is what your refusal sounds like from the other side of the room. Why offers sound like accusations. Say the exact words back to yourself. Are you okay? Do you need anything? Let me take that. Inside you, those sentences do not arrive as offers. They arrive as assessments. Somebody has looked at you, concluded that you are not managing and is now moving to intervene. The offer contains a verdict, and the verdict is that you are visibly insufficient, that whatever you thought you were presenting has failed to convince. Your body responds before your thinking does. The spine straightens slightly. The voice becomes warmer and lighter, which is the tell, because warmth deployed at speed is a door closing politely. Notice that the response is not defensive in any visible way. Defensiveness would be legible. What you produce instead is reassurance, delivered so smoothly that the other person ends up comforting you about nothing and thanking you for it. Now strip your translation off what was actually said. The person said they would like to be close to you, and they cannot think of another way to propose it. That is all. Offering to carry something is one of the very few socially available methods of saying I want in. Adults are not given many instruments. They cannot simply announce a wish for intimacy without sounding strange, so they say, do you need anything? And they wait, and the answer tells them whether the door is open. It is a request disguised as a service, and you have been declining requests for years, while sincerely believing you are declining services. The distinction matters because of where the refusal gets filed. A declined service is filed as logistics. A declined request is filed as information about the person who made it. They do not conclude that you are private. They conclude that they were not the one, that somebody else would have gotten a different answer, that whatever quality makes a person worth leaning on is a quality they apparently lack, which means the person most damaged by your self-sufficiency is not you. The person who wanted to be needed. Everyone needs to be needed, not admired, needed. The two are so different that admiration functions almost as a consolation prize awarded for the failure to be needed. Being needed is how a person confirms they occupy space in somebody else's life. It is the answer to the question running underneath every relationship, which is whether it would matter if they were gone. A person who is needed has an answer, and the answer is load-bearing, and it holds up on bad nights. A person who is only admired has a compliment, and a compliment holds up for about an hour. Place somebody beside you for 3 years. They admire you enormously. They tell other people about you. They have also never once been necessary. They have never fixed anything you could not fix, never known anything you did not already know, never been the reason a hard night was survivable. They love you and they cannot point to a single load-bearing wall they built anywhere in the structure of your life. Then imagine the private inventory that person conducts, probably around year 2, probably at night. They look for their contribution. They find affection, presence, jokes, and nothing structural. Affection is not nothing, but affection alone tends to feel decorative, and decorative is the exact word that surfaces, and once it surfaces, it is very difficult to remove. What they conclude is not that you are difficult. Difficult would be easier for both of you because difficult is a thing people fight about and repair. They conclude that they are ornamental, and a person who has concluded they are ornamental does not stage a confrontation. There is nothing to confront. They do something much quieter instead, and it takes months, and it begins with a slight reduction in effort that neither of you can date afterward, and by the time you notice it, there is nothing left to discuss. That quietness has a name, and it looks nothing like what you would expect. Self-sufficiency is a quiet verdict. The verdict is never spoken. That is precisely what makes it permanent. If you said out loud that you did not consider the other person capable of helping you, they could argue. They could produce evidence. They could ask what specifically they had failed at, and you could answer, and the answer could be wrong. And being wrong out loud is how two people change anything. But you never say it. You simply keep handling everything, and the handling makes the argument for you, silently, every single day, without ever giving them a sentence to push against. This is the cruelest property of hyper-independence. It delivers a devastating message about another person's value while remaining completely deniable. You never told them they were useless. You just never once needed them, which is a stronger claim than any insult, and you made the claim several hundred times, and every single time you were being kind. They cannot fight it, because there is no accusation. They cannot repair it, because there is no complaint. They are left holding a feeling they cannot justify and eventually cannot voice, because voicing it makes them sound petty in their own ears, before it even reaches yours. Who complains about a partner who never asks for anything? Who says out loud that they wish they were more necessary? The sentence sounds like a demand to be given problems. So they rehearse the sentence privately and never deliver it, and the private rehearsal slowly becomes a private conclusion, and privately is where relationships end. Not in an argument, in a silent revision of expectation, performed alone, months before anybody says anything. The rooms you keep locked while standing in them. You are present. This is what makes the whole thing so hard to see. You show up. You remember the appointment, the anniversary, the name of their difficult coworker and what the coworker did in March. You listen well, better than most people, and you ask the follow-up question that proves you were listening rather than waiting. By every observable metric of presence, you are there, and anybody auditing your relationships from the outside would find them healthy. And yet if that person were asked what you are most afraid of, they would guess. If they were asked what you have not recovered from, they would guess. If they were asked what you were like at 19, in the year that changed something, they would assemble a version out of 3 anecdotes you have told at dinner parties, both of them funny, one of them slightly untrue. You have been in the room the entire time with several rooms locked behind you, and you did not lock them out of distrust of this specific person, which is what makes any conversation about it so frustrating for them. There is nothing personal to address. You locked those rooms years ago, lost interest in the keys, and at some point the locking stopped being a decision and became architecture. The strange part is that you feel known. You feel known because you are seen constantly, and because you are asked about often, and because seen and known have been the same word inside your head for so long that the difference no longer produces any signal at all. Until somebody says something that reveals they do not know you, something small and confidently wrong about your own history, and you feel a loneliness with no obvious cause and no legitimate complaint attached. How reliability becomes a wall. Reliability is the socially rewarded form of distance. Nobody criticizes it. There is no intervention for being too dependable. There is no friend who sits you down out of concern about your punctuality. You will be promoted for it, thanked for it, described in eulogies with it, and it will keep every person in your life at exactly the distance you set, permanently, with full cultural approval and no resistance whatsoever. Look at the structure of it. A reliable person is the one others come to. Traffic moves one way. You are the destination, never the traveler. Every relationship in your life has a shape, and the shape is that you are the fixed point, and they are the ones who arrive with problems, and the arrangement feels like being valued. It is actually being positioned. The fixed point does not get to move. It does not get to arrive somewhere with a problem of its own. It does not get to be the one who is bad at this today, or the one who forgot, or the one who needs the evening rearranged. The role that earns you love is the identical role that prohibits you from receiving love in any form other than gratitude. And notice what gratitude actually is. Gratitude is what people feel toward somebody who gave them something. It is directional, and the direction is away from you. It is a fine substance to collect for a decade or so, warm enough at first before it becomes clear that it is not the same material as intimacy and cannot be substituted for it at any exchange rate. There is a particular loneliness that belongs specifically to people who are thanked constantly. It has no vocabulary, because every available description of it sounds like ingratitude for a good life. The loneliness you built and called freedom. At some point you decided you preferred it this way. That decision was real, and it was made in good faith, and it was made with incomplete information. You compared being alone against the specific version of being connected that you had actually experienced, and being alone won easily. Of course it did. The comparison was rigged from the start, because the connection on offer was the kind that comes with an invoice, and against that, solitude is not merely tolerable, it is a clear improvement. So you built something efficient. No debts, no leverage, nothing anybody can retrieve and use against you 11 months later in an argument about something else. Total sovereignty over your own life, your own schedule, your own recovery from your own difficulties. You called it freedom, and it functioned as freedom for years, and it kept every promise it made to you. The problem with a structure that keeps its promises is that you stop auditing it. Nothing prompts a review. You have not asked in a very long time whether the thing you built is still solving the problem it was built for, or whether the problem ended somewhere around your 24th year, and the structure simply kept running afterward, out of momentum, at full operating cost, protecting you from people who were never going to send a bill. Freedom that cannot be set down is not freedom. A capability you are not permitted to decline is not a capability. It is an obligation with better branding. It is a shift you have been covering for so long that you no longer remember who assigned it, or when it was supposed to end, or whether anybody is still checking the schedule. What happens when somebody refuses to leave? Occasionally, somebody does not accept the arrangement. They keep offering after the third refusal. They notice the warm voice and name it out loud, which is unbearable. They ask what you actually needed, rather than what you said you needed. They do not leave the kitchen. They sit down. And your response to this is not relief, which is the single detail that should tell you everything about how deep the installation goes. Your response is discomfort, escalating toward something close to anger. A person who will not be managed is a person generating a balance you cannot immediately clear, and every instinct you own says to correct the imbalance now, before it accumulates, before it becomes something they could reference later. So you do something generous for them quickly, disproportionately, something larger than what they gave. You even the account. You return to the creditor position as fast as the situation allows. Understand that they feel it happen. They may have no language for it, but they feel the transaction close, and they feel themselves relocated to the visitor side of the counter, and they register that the closing was performed with affection, which makes it impossible to name without sounding paranoid. This is the moment where the pattern is either interrupted or reinstalled, and it is not a large moment. It does not look like a breakthrough. It lasts roughly 4 seconds and involves nothing except whether you allow a debt to stand overnight. Receiving, as the harder skill. You have practiced giving for 30 years. You have practiced receiving for none. This is not a metaphor about emotional openness. It is a description of an actual missing capability. comparable to never having learned to swim. Receiving well is a skill with mechanics, and the mechanics were never taught to you. And you have compensated for the absence so smoothly that nobody, including you, has ever identified it as an absence rather than a preference. The mechanics are simple and almost unbearable to execute. You let somebody do something for you that you could have done faster. You let them do it their way, which is worse than your way, and you do not improve it afterward. You do not supervise. You do not narrate the correct method while they work. You do not immediately reciprocate, which is the hardest instruction in the entire list. You say thank you once rather than 4 times, because the 4th thank you is not gratitude, it is a payment, and it converts the gift into a settled account so that nothing is owed and nothing is held. Then you sit in the feeling that follows. It is not gratitude, and it is not comfort. It is the specific vertigo of being in somebody's hands, of having an outcome that depends on a person you do not control, and it is genuinely awful, and it lasts less time than you expect. That vertigo is the whole thing. It is not danger. It has been mislabeled as danger for decades by a nervous system that was calibrated accurately under conditions that no longer exist, and has never once been recalibrated, because recalibration requires exactly the exposure you have spent your life preventing, the cost of never being rescued. Something happens to people who are helped through something terrible, and it has never happened to you. They come out the other side knowing a thing, not that they are strong. They may not be strong at all. Many of them fell apart completely. They know that when it collapsed, somebody came. That knowledge sits in the body differently from any belief installed by reasoning. It cannot be argued into a person, cannot be journaled into a person, cannot be affirmed into place. It has to be witnessed once in real conditions, with real stakes. You have survived several terrible things. You survived them competently and alone, and you drew the wrong conclusion from your own survival. The conclusion you drew was that you do not need anybody. The accurate conclusion is narrower and much less comforting, which is that nobody was tested. You have no data. You have a long record of not requiring the data. So the question of whether you are actually loved, as opposed to appreciated, remains permanently open. Not because the people around you are withholding. Most of them have been standing there with their hands out for years. It remains open because you have never run the experiment, and you have never run it because you already know how disappointment feels, and you have no interest in a second edition. But an unrun experiment does not protect you. It only relocates the cost. Instead of one clear disappointment, you get a permanent low-grade uncertainty, and the uncertainty arrives specifically at night, specifically on the days when the answer would have mattered most, and a theoretical answer provides no warmth whatsoever at that hour. The only way the question closes is expensive, and it involves handing somebody something you cannot easily take back. Letting somebody carry something real, not a small thing. Small things do not count, and both of you will know it immediately. Handing somebody a trivial task as a gesture of openness is a performance of receiving, and it accomplishes the opposite of its intention, because it demonstrates with precision how little you were willing to risk. They will weigh what they were given. They will compare it against what they know you are carrying. They will draw the correct conclusion, which is that they were handed the visitor version, and the conclusion will land harder than another refusal would have. It has to be something that matters. Something where their failure would actually cost you, financially or logistically or emotionally. Something you cannot quietly complete yourself in parallel as insurance, because the insurance is the refusal, and you have constructed your entire adult life out of quiet parallel backups nobody was ever told about. You will want to warn them how important it is. Resist that, because the warning is supervision wearing a considerate face. You will want to check in twice. Resist that as well, and expect the resisting to feel irresponsible. The point is not the outcome of the task. The point is the interval, the stretch of hours in which you are exposed and somebody else is holding the weight and there is nothing for you to do, and that interval is the only location in which the recalibration can physically occur. It will feel like a mistake for most of its duration. That feeling is not a signal about the person, and it is not intuition. It is the old invoice arriving out of habit for a purchase you did not make. The version of you that can be reached. There is a person you have not been yet. Not a weaker version. Not somebody who has traded competence for connection, because that trade was never on the table, and the fear that it was on the table is what has kept you here for years. The competence stays. Everything you can do, you will still be able to do next year and the year after that. What changes is a single property, and the property is whether weight can be placed on you. That person is reachable. Somebody can walk toward them and arrive. Somebody can be necessary in their life and know it and stop conducting the private inventory at night and stop wondering whether they are ornamental. The people around that person are not diminished by being needed. They are finally located. Being needed is not a burden you would be inflicting on them. It is the address at which they get to exist in your life. And the loneliness you have carried for years, the one you could never explain to anybody because your life is visibly full of people who love you and say so, resolves in the only place it was ever going to resolve. Not in being loved more. You are already loved as much as anybody can love a monument. It resolves in being reached at all. The offer will come again. It will come this week, probably, from somebody who has already been refused more times than they have mentioned. They will ask if you need anything, and you will feel the sentence forming before they finish, the warm one, the light one, the one that closes the door so pleasantly that nobody in the room notices a door was involved. That is the 4 seconds. Everything is in there.